Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is falling into patterns. We talk about falling into patterns like it's falling into some kind of hole that we can't get out of. But let's talk about falling into patterns. Sometimes they're they're not the most life-affirming kind of patterns, but other times patterns can offer us comfort and solace and healing. So let's talk about that today. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. First, let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, negativity, stress, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world and connecting you with everything beyond. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, and just bring yourselves present right here, right now, to this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a Monday, and time keeps marching on, right? So today we're talking about falling into patterns. And I think it's a really interesting expression, you know, falling into a pattern. And I think this will give us an opportunity to actually look at what kinds of patterns we have and how some of them can be really nurturing and nourishing. You know, like we probably have patterns of comfort. So comfort foods. I remember when I was a kid, if I was sick, I think especially when I was sick, but an anchor for comfort is often food. And so one of my anchors, interestingly enough, and I can't say I've had either of these things in years, but one of the anchors for comfort for me was grilled cheese and tomato soup. And, you know, like when I think of grilled cheese and tomato soup, I think of comfort, bad habits. So patterns can be bad habits, but they can be good habits too. Good morning, Rosalind. Really good to have you here with us this morning. So, you know, normally when we talk about falling into patterns, it has this negative connotation, like we're falling into a hole that we can't get out of, and it's beyond our control, you know. And we can notice that sometimes there are bad habits, but also sometimes I think that it's helpful to entertain the possibility that even bad habits had originally a positive intention. And this is sort of a premise from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is that every behavior has a positive intention, even if it ends up not being the greatest behavior. So for instance, growing up in a household that is dysfunctional, children often become hypervigilant. right? They become hypervigilant. They are not trusting. They are always on edge, always watching for everything, with the, in anticipation of what could go wrong, right? And so that's a protective pattern. It's essential. In fact, it's a survival pattern. And it has a positive intention. However, when that threat has passed, going forward in life, that hypervigilance can end up being a destructive pattern, right? It can end up being something that prevents us from cultivating trusting relationships. It can end up being something that keeps us at an emotional place of anxiety that can be wreaking havoc, for instance, on our nervous system. And so if we recognize that all patterns and behaviors have an initial positive intention, it might be, it provides us an inroad to be able to shift that pattern. But let's look at positive patterns. I mean, again, food is often a comfort, or we associate it with comfort. And that can be when we really need soothing, depending on what the food is and in what quantity, that can be a beneficial thing to be able to find a way to self-soothe. I think that we can cultivate positive patterns, like to do something like EFT, the tapping technique, when we're not feeling well or happy or optimal, we can use that, we can cultivate that as a pattern. That becomes a positive pattern, and it's a pattern for self-soothing that's powerful. When we notice that we're falling into patterns that are not so supportive, we can make a choice, certainly, to move out of that pattern. Not all patterns are bad habits. So, and anything in excess is not necessarily positive, right? So let's say chocolate is associated with soothing. If we're able to have a piece of chocolate and really, really savor it and allow ourselves to be comforted and connected, if it's a tool that enables us to connect or reconnect, then that's not a bad thing. If we go and eat 5 chocolate bars, maybe that's not such a great thing. That becomes falling into a pattern rather than utilizing a pattern. And last week, we were talking about consumerism and sometimes buying something, giving ourselves a gift. That can be a really positive thing. And yet, if it becomes a compulsive pattern where we just keep buying to try and find that soothing, then again, not such a positive pattern. And maybe this is the case with most patterns, that in moderation, they can be really positive. And when tipping the scale into overindulgence or overexpression, then maybe that becomes not so positive a pattern. Like maybe when we're feeling overwhelmed, we might get into a pattern of, just trying to put whatever the overwhelm is out of our mind, out of our consciousness. And that can be a really good thing to give ourselves a respite from something. And yet, if we persist in that behavior, we can get ourselves in all kinds of trouble because we're not taking care of the things that really need our attention. So it's interesting, Rosalind, you say bad habits. And I wonder if bad habits become bad habits when they're unchecked, like if we take them to extremes. So I can talk about a pattern, well, two patterns that I noticed in myself. Over the weekend, I was feeling kind of low. And one thing that is a really nurturing pattern that I have, or a nurturing activity for me, is cooking. Excuse me. Not just cooking, but playing in the kitchen. And so yesterday, I woke up early, and I didn't set an intention to engage in cooking, but I found myself preparing all kinds of foods. I made soup, I made vegan cheese, I made chia seed raw crackers, and cranberry sauce and lentil soup. Like, I really went to town. And I have to say that it relieved, it nurtured me. Like, there's something very nurturing for me about kitchen stuff. Not even eating all the food, but preparing the food. And I also have a pattern where I have historically overindulged in food. And, that's been in check, but I saw that coming to the forefront again over the weekend, and through Thanksgiving. And noticing that is very interesting too, because you can enjoy food in moderate quantities, and that can be really nurturing and helpful. And yet, when you overdo it, and Thanksgiving is a holiday certainly for associated with overindulgence, I'm afraid, but when you overdo it, then you don't feel great. And for some people, it carries a whole lot of guilt along with it, and body shaming and all kinds of other things. So where, we get to look at where's the tipping point in our habits and our behaviors and our patterns. Where do we cross the line from support and positive nurturing over into overindulgence, or what we might consider on the spectrum like a negative, something that has a negative impact. I think it's interesting to look at how Rosalind says, when you know your worth, you are empowered to act on it. Knowing your worth means it is inherent, not acquired. I agree with you 100%, Rosalind, that we have inherent value, that we don't have to prove anything, that we are innately sufficient. And the cultural messaging that we receive doesn't necessarily support that notion, but that is the truth. Good morning, Susan. So good to have you joining us. We're talking about falling into patterns And Rosalind says, so when I'm aware I'm falling into negative thought, I can be reminded to come back to loving thoughts for self. And it's true. I think that you've kind of hit on the heart of the matter, is becoming aware, bringing to awareness. So if we are engaged in a negative pattern of emotion or of thought, what is it that happens that enables us to recognize that, and then not only recognize it, but to be able to take the action to turn it around? So to recognize our negative thoughts, and then to say, oh, I'm having negative thoughts, and oh, I have the power to transform this into something that is more loving or more positive, and then actually to take the action. So there's Dennis, you are so cute. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to have you here with us. Thank you. So we're talking about falling into patterns, and maybe we're also talking about falling out of patterns. And what is that pivot point that enables us, as we're following a certain trajectory, to have the awareness that of our actions. So we're stepping back into a meta position and having awareness of our action or of our presence or of our being, and then to have the act of grace or will or intention from that position to say, well, what can I do differently? And Susan says, in so much pain from a negative thought. So Susan, I'm hoping that you're not currently in so much pain from a negative thought. And I invite you to see, here's the thing. Sometimes we get into these very challenging patterns and pain, and we can experience the pain. We know that we can go. First of all, it is important to experience what you're experiencing. And then there's a point beyond which we can say, okay, let's not wallow in that. So, and how can we shift it? How can we complete that? Sometimes by feeling the feeling, truly feeling the feeling, it lifts. Actually, all the time, what I notice is that when we truly feel the feeling, it lifts. It may come back, or a feeling similar may come back, and it may not be that much later, but it's this tidal thing, like tides coming in and out, where these feelings arise and we can release them, and then they may come back again. But for instance, and I've spoken about this a lot, is that, oh, Susan, I'm so sorry. So Susan says, unbearable, can't touch it. So Susan, I know that when we have this deep, deep, deep anguish and despair, it's kind of terrifying to allow ourselves to experience it, because there's the fear that we're going to get swallowed by it and never come out. And there is, see, it's not far from the surface, grief for me. When we allow ourselves to deeply allow and feel that emotion, and sometimes we can't even access the emotion because it's just too much, it's too overwhelming, like you said, can't touch it. What you can presence yourself to are sensations in your body, And as you experience the sensations in your body, you can allow yourself to breathe into that. And maybe it's even like a physical heartache, and you can allow yourself to breathe into it, and it will bring forward the emotion, and allow yourself to feel it, and allow yourself to cry through it. And yeah, I know sometimes it feels like your heart is breaking. I know how that feels. And as you allow yourself to feel that, it will lift. I promise you, as you allow yourself to move into that feeling and feel what's there, rather than thinking what's there, rather than telling yourself that thought over and over and over again. I know that's a pattern to be obsessing on a certain thought or a certain incident, or to be recounting it, recounting it, and recounting it. There are things that we can do to shift the recounting. We can change the sound of it. We can change the distance. We can change if it's a visual that we're playing over in our heads. Maybe it's in color. We get to turn it into black and white. We get to shift some of the experience of these things. Part of it is also by feeling it. And when we stop resisting it, because sometimes the thought of how powerful and deep and painful it is just too much. So we resist feeling the feelings. As we release that resistance and allow ourselves to feel it, our body can release it. Sometimes those things show up in physical pain. Rosalind says, neuroplasticity, it takes approximately 60 days of successive practice to make the new pattern permanent. And we practice as we practice purposefully, we will build new habits. And this is really, really an awesome awareness and practice. Thank you so much for that, Rosalind, that we can literally practice new habits. And there are times when things can change like that. But the place of shifting emotion is really, it takes intention. Absolutely, Susan. It takes intention. And Susan, I recommend that you check out tapping. So there's a website called The Tapping Solution, and it's a pattern of tapping on acupressure points that relieves stress and allows you to process through deep emotion and all kinds of other experiences. So I invite you to check that out. I think it'll support you a lot. And we have all these tools available to us, and we often forget about those tools. And then at times there's just not the will to use them. So sometimes we just want to feel sad. And that's the fact of it. Sometimes we just want to feel sad and bad and depressed. And at some point, there's the will to say, okay, I'm ready to stop feeling this way. I'm ready to be complete with this and to move to the next feeling. And like I said, I've been experiencing a lot of emotion over the loss of Maggie. And see, it's right there. And this morning, I just have been looking for where that shift can come in for me. And I went to take out some trash this morning, and I saw rainbows on the wall from glass that was reflected, and that allowed that. I allowed rainbows in my heart, and that allows for the shift. And the thing is that that falling into patterns, we can notice our patterns, and we can also notice when we're ready to shift, when we can make room for the shift, when we can create an allowance and a space for that shift. Susan says, it started in my spine a few days ago, still hurts last night, my foot. So exactly, when we have deep emotional pain, ultimately it shows up in our bodies. And when we can presence ourselves to the experience in our bodies and breathe into the sensation without judging it as pain, when we breathe into the sensation and experience it, allow ourselves to feel it, sometimes the pain will get unbearable, magnified, and then it'll dissipate. And so it's a technique that has been tremendously powerful for me, I have to say. Rosalind says, moving from avoidance to sensing and feeling without interpretation or judgment. Rosalind, I couldn't have said that any better. That's so perfect. Moving from avoidance to sensing and feeling without judgment. Absolutely. Curiosity may help move us from avoidance to approach with mindful investigation. 100%, Rosalind. Thank you for that. So perfect. And with that, I am going to say how much I appreciate you all. And I so appreciate your engagement in these conversations and your authenticity and your presence. And I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, no, Susan, not by accident at all. Perfect. And Rosalind says we're 80% more likely to create awareness and change when we write things down. That's also a really good observation and recommendation, Rosalind. Thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to call it a morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please check out at 9 a.m. Eastern, by the way. Please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network. And I just want to say thank you for the richness that you bring me, and that these mornings with you just help me to be set up for an awesome day. So I with great gratitude and appreciation. Until next time.